forest does not bury the dead. It holds the darkness and returns a heartbeat. In a place where darkness completes its work, silence is no longer empty. It becomes a witness. Deep inside the Manistee National Forest, there are stories that are never told in words. They are kept by the trees, by damp soil, and by time. November 3rd, 2025. A 22-year-old woman leaves her home. A mother of 2 young sons. 38 weeks pregnant, just days away from holding her 3rd baby boy. She gets into a stranger's vehicle. No message, no distress signal, no call for help. And from that moment, she disappears. 22 days later, the forest gives back her body. But the baby is not there. As of today, January 2026, that infant boy has never been found. Tonight, we will walk this case step by step. From the unbearable grief of children waiting for their mother to an investigation filled with contradictions, and to the questions now facing the court. The next critical hearing, January 30th, 2026. If you want to follow the truth to the very end, subscribe to the channel now. The pain begins here, with the human being at the center of it all. Rebecca Park. Every investigation begins with a human being. And in Rebecca Park's case, that human being was a mother about to give birth. Rebecca Park was never a name, meant to live inside a police file. Before becoming the center of a homicide investigation, Rebecca was a young mother trying to build a life under conditions that were never easy. She had 2 young sons at an age where their entire world revolved around one person, their mother. Mealtimes, bedtime, and the sense of safety that only exists when a mother is nearby. At the time she vanished, Rebecca was 38 weeks pregnant, just days away from giving birth to her 3rd child, a baby boy. According to family members, Rebecca spoke often about the near future, about labor, about recovery, about becoming a mother. One more time. There was no indication that she was preparing to leave her life behind. There is one detail often misunderstood and quietly repeated without context. The last name, Park. Rebecca carried the name Park, not because of Asian ancestry, but because it was the surname of the family who raised her. Rebecca, along with her brother and sister, was adopted at a very young age, when she was about 1 year old, after being separated from her biological mother by Child Protective Services. Her adoptive family gave her a name, a home, and a childhood, growing up in Michigan, United States. In public records and available photographs, there is no indication that Rebecca had Asian heritage. Park, in this case, is simply an English-Scottish surname passed down from the American family who raised her. Not long before she disappeared, Rebecca received approximately $2,000 from a small inheritance. Not a large sum, but in families with complicated relationships, sometimes even that amount is enough for long simmering tensions to surface. On the evening of November 3rd, 2025, Rebecca left her home. She did not take many personal belongings. She did not clearly say where she was going. She left. No unusual message, no distress signal, no call for help. It looked like any other evening. And that was the last time anyone saw Rebecca alive. People often say, children are a lifetime investment. But for Rebecca, the hope of raising 3 children together as one family was cut short in a single night. Have you ever considered how an ordinary evening can change an entire life? The pain of her young children begins here.
Where's Mom?
Not spoken loudly. Just a child's voice, soft fading, breaking apart. Rebecca's son asked, for the first time, after it got dark. He asked again, when the door still didn't open. Then he sat quietly, on the chair, holding his stuffed bear tight, sniffling as if waiting just a little longer would be enough for his mother to walk through the door. No one answered right away. Someone bent down and wrapped him in an embrace. Someone else turned away, so the child wouldn't see them cry.
Is Mom coming home soon?
The question came again, this time quieter, more fragile. And when there was still no answer, the child began to cry. Not loudly, just the steady, exhausted sobs of a child, waiting for his mother, without understanding why the waiting was taking so long. For the adults in that house, it was the moment their hearts tightened. Because they knew there are some waits that never end with a response. When Rebecca didn't come home that night, the family grew concerned. By morning, that concern had turned into fear. Rebecca's biological mother, Courtney Bartholomew, appeared before local media after nights without sleep. She tried to stand steady, tried to finish a sentence. But her voice trembled from the very first words. She stopped mid-sentence, turned away, and wiped her tears. In that moment, it was no longer a press conference. It was just a mother terrified that she might never see her daughter again. Rebecca's sister, Kimberly Park, stood beside her, gripping her mother's hand. When it was her turn to speak, she tightened her grip, as if letting go would cause everything to collapse. She didn't say much, just repeated, one sentence in a voice, almost a whisper. If anyone knows anything, please say something. On social media, prayers began to flood in. People who had never met Rebecca shared her photo, as if that act alone might bring her back. Around town, missing person posters appeared on utility poles, store windows, and familiar intersections. At night, the house became too quiet. No one spoke much. No one cried out loud, because there are moments when tears are gone and silence becomes the deepest pain. But that pain didn't stay inside the house. It spread through the town of Cadillac and into a community waiting for a miracle. The city of Cadillac, Michigan, is not large. Its population, just around 10,000 people. Here, people know each other by name, by everyday stories, by morning coffee at familiar cafes, by afternoons spent foraging mushrooms in the woods near their homes. And when Rebecca Park went missing, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't news from far away. This wasn't a stranger. This was Rebecca, the young woman who smiled easily, the mother of 2 small boys, pregnant with her 3rd child, who suddenly vanished into the darkness of Manistee National Forest, a forest right next door, a place locals considered their backyard. On November 14th, less than 10 days later, dozens of volunteers gathered. They came with flashlights, canine units, ATVs, worn boots, and a fierce belief that Rebecca was simply lost. They searched muddy dirt roads, leaf-covered trails, sections of forest that even lifelong locals rarely ventured into. Then came November 18th, the due date of her third baby boy. Dozens of people gathered in a small park at the heart of town. They lit candles, small flames trembling in the late autumn cold. Some held Rebecca's photo, her warm smile, her pregnant belly, round and full of life. Some softly hummed an old hymn. Others stood in silence, hands clasped, eyes tightly shut, as if praying hard enough could force a miracle into existence. They prayed not only for Rebecca, but for the two little boys waiting for their mother at home, for the baby who never had the chance to be born, for a family breaking apart piece by piece. On local social media, the hashtag #FindRebecca spread like wildfire. People who had never met her shared her photo, shared her story, offered a $10,000 reward for any information, any lead, anything. The town became one large family, waiting together for a miracle. But the forest did not answer. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single cry echoing back from the trees. The days passed, the searches continued, and hope began to thin like a candle about to go out. Then on November 25th, a civilian volunteer search group found Rebecca's body in the forest, just 2.5 miles from a relative's home. The baby was not there. Cadillac fell silent. Not because there were no more tears, but because, at that point, silence itself had become a different kind of pain. The pain of those who had searched for miles, lit candles for hours, and still could not save her. But the pain did not end there. It transformed into a question no one dared to say out loud. Why was Rebecca's body found after 22 days? But the baby boy she carried was still missing, as if he had never existed at all. A life that never had the chance to begin, swallowed by the forest or by someone's hands. If that question won't let you look away, if you want to keep digging step by step to see what the darkness will eventually reveal, stay with the channel. Just one simple subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Rebecca's body was found after 22 days, but the absence of the baby pushed this case into an entirely different category. The forest returned Rebecca, but it did not return the baby boy she was carrying. With no medical records, no documented birth, and no official trace, what actually happened in the time between Rebecca's disappearance and the day her body was found? From that moment on, this investigation was no longer about a missing person in the woods. It became a chain of questions, forcing investigators to start over, to re-examine every relationship, every final movement, and every detail from the hours before Rebecca vanished. A life that never got to take its first breath was swallowed by the darkness. And if you want to continue this journey with us, step by step, to see what that darkness may eventually reveal. Stay here. This case is not over. The first real lead did not come from a witness. It came from something that cannot lie. Rebecca Park's cell phone was found along the side of a dirt road. Not smashed, not destroyed. No signs of being discarded in panic. But the data inside told a very different story. The movement timestamps did not align with the initial statements given by people close to Rebecca. Location pings appeared at places no one could explain why she would have been there. And as investigators began reconstructing the route, one question emerged immediately. Was Rebecca traveling this path on her own, or was someone else driving her? When all the routes were connected, they led back to the same place. Manistee National Forest, a forest spanning over 540,000 acres, large enough to stretch time, erase traces, and blur the truth. For investigators, this was no longer just a backdrop. A working theory began to take shape. The phone may have been separated from Rebecca at a specific moment, and that moment marked outside intervention. There were no conclusions yet, only data quietly pointing in a direction. And that direction did not lead home. It led straight into the forest. They say the truth lives in the smallest details. And this cell phone was that detail. From here, the real search began. November 4th, 2025. Just one day after Rebecca disappeared, her family officially reports her missing. From that moment on, time is no longer measured in days. It is measured in hours. The search is activated. K-9 units are deployed into the forest. Local authorities sweep dirt roads, remote trails, and isolated areas, places where a person could vanish, without leaving a clear trace. Volunteers from the town of Cadillac step forward on their own, carrying hastily printed maps, flashlights, and a hope they haven't yet put into words. They move in lines. They call Rebecca's name. They stop whenever they see a faint disturbance in the ground. Day after day, areas are marked, searched, then searched again. But the forest does not respond. No calls for help, no personal belongings, no indication that Rebecca ever passed through. The search stretches on for more than 3 weeks. 3 weeks of morning fog, of dropping temperatures, and of evenings that end in heavy silence. As time passes, hope does not disappear all at once. It simply narrows, little by little, until November 25th, 2025. At that point, the search is no longer about bringing a mother home. It ends with a discovery no one was prepared for. Rebecca's body is found, but the baby is not there. And from that moment on, this is no longer a search operation. It becomes the starting point of a criminal investigation. And as investigators begin to dig deeper, the first contradictions start to surface. When the search comes to an end, the investigation truly begins. And very quickly, authorities recognize a serious problem. The statements do not align. Timelines conflict. Sequences of events shift from one interview to the next. More importantly, the phone data does not support what has been said. Movement logs reveal gaps. Unexplained windows of time where no one can account for. where Rebecca was or who she was with. Who is lying? And why? As the gap between words and data becomes impossible to ignore, the case moves into a different phase. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is brought in to assist. Not to expand the search, but to review, to verify, and to cross-check every detail. From this point forward, this is no longer handled as a standard missing person case. It is officially classified as a criminal investigation. And when a case reaches that stage, statements are no longer stories. They become evidence. And when data begins to speak, instead of testimony, a new investigative direction starts to take shape. Once the body was found, all speculation had to stop. From that moment forward, only science and evidence remained. The forensic examination confirmed that Rebecca Park was deceased prior to being discovered. Medical examiners also confirmed that Rebecca died after her disappearance. However, the exact timeline of how long after she vanished was not released to the public. Not because of missing data, but because in an active criminal investigation, the time of death is a detail with exceptional legal value. Authorities did not disclose the position of the body when it was found. They also did not release the condition of Rebecca's clothing at the scene. These details were intentionally withheld to cross-check statements, digital evidence, and additional forensic findings. However, investigators made one conclusion clear. This was not an accident. Forensics ruled out death due to exposure, getting lost in the forest, weather conditions, or an unintended incident. What was documented at the scene included details not made public, but sufficient to confirm human intervention. Not a moment of misfortune. Not an unforeseen event. But actions that occurred before Rebecca's death. The autopsy also confirmed another critical fact. Rebecca was still pregnant at the time of her death. But when her body was found, the baby was no longer there. There were no signs of natural childbirth, no corresponding medical records, no evidence that the event occurred in any healthcare facility. For forensic investigators, this was not merely unusual. It was a grave indicator that actions had taken place outside all medical protocols. And from these forensic conclusions, the scope of the investigation narrowed dramatically. No longer the question, was there a crime? But instead, who did this and why? If you're asking that same question, Wetson, stay with us. Because from this point forward, the investigation is no longer about what happened in the forest. It moves directly into motive. And what's about to surface may leave you shaken. Once the forensic evidence was sufficient to confirm this was a homicide, the next question became unavoidable. Why did Rebecca have to die? According to prosecutors, what investigators have gathered so far indicates this was not a spontaneous act. Multiple indicators point to prior planning. As a result, investigators began focusing on three primary motive pathways. First, financial. Rebecca had recently received a modest sum of money, approximately $2,000. Not enough to change a life. But within the context of strained family relationships, that amount could act as a catalyst, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. Could $2,000 be enough to turn a family member into a killer? Second, family relationships. Those closest to the victim are always examined first. Not because they are guilty, but because they know best the routines, the habits, and the vulnerabilities of the victim. Investigators reviewed long-standing conflicts, unresolved disputes, and relationships showing signs of instability in the period leading up to Rebecca's disappearance. Third, control and concealment. The disappearance of the baby, with no medical records, raises a deeply troubling possibility that the act was not only intended to take Rebecca's life, but to control or erase a consequence connected to the unborn child. A life that never had the chance to be born, yet became the center of a secret that could not remain hidden forever. This line of inquiry is exceptionally sensitive, and for that reason, has not been publicly detailed. As of now, authorities have not announced a single officially confirmed motive. But the pieces are beginning to fall into place. And as motive comes into focus, this case is moving closer to the moment every investigation ultimately reaches. If you're asking what the real motive is, stay with us. Because from this point forward, the investigation is no longer about what happened in the forest. It moves straight into motive. And what's about to emerge may leave you deeply unsettled. December 2025. After weeks of reviewing evidence and cross-checking data, prosecutors announce charges that send shockwaves through the public. Two names are formally identified. Courtney Bartholomew, Rebecca's biological mother. Bradley Bartholomew, her stepfather. According to the charging documents, both are accused of being directly involved in Rebecca's death. The charges include first-degree murder, alleging intent and premeditation; conspiracy, alleging coordinated actions between multiple parties; torture, a particularly severe charge, indicating the level of violence prosecutors believe occurred. But why were these two individuals brought into the case? According to prosecutors, the decision was not based on a single factor. It was the result of a chain of findings assembled over the course of the investigation. First, the direct relationship to the victim. Courtney and Bradley were part of Rebecca's closest inner circle. In criminal investigations, those closest to the victim are examined first, not because they are presumed guilty, but because they knew Rebecca's schedule, had direct access to her, and were present during the final days before she disappeared. Second, documented family conflicts. According to the prosecution, the investigation revealed long-standing tensions, not isolated disputes. Rebecca grew up within a complex family environment marked by overlapping relationships and instability. Courtney, her biological mother, who had previously been involved in personal relationships connected to people around Rebecca, is alleged to have had deep and ongoing conflicts with her daughter. Bradley, the stepfather, who lived under the same roof, is also alleged to have been part of those conflicts, with inconsistent statements regarding his role in the days leading up to Rebecca's disappearance. Additionally, Rebecca's sister, Kimberly Park, who was close to Rebecca and was among those who initially reported her missing, has been charged with evidence tampering and making false statements. Prosecutors argue these inconsistencies may be connected to efforts to conceal information. Rebecca's fiancé, Richard Falor, who had prior legal issues, was also part of the initial investigative scope. Overlapping romantic relationships were identified, further complicating an already fractured family dynamic. When viewed alongside financial factors and Rebecca's pregnancy, these conflicts become potential motives that investigators believe must be examined. How does a case reach the point where a mother is accused of killing her own daughter? Third, inconsistencies between statements and data. Certain statements did not align with phone records and verified timelines. On their own, these discrepancies do not prove a crime. But when placed alongside forensic findings and the physical scene, they form the legal basis for advancing the case into formal prosecution. From this point forward, the case officially enters the judicial process. However, under the law, all defendants are presumed innocent until a final verdict is reached in court. These charges are not conclusions. They are the starting line of a process where every piece of evidence must withstand scrutiny under the rule of law. And the next question is no longer, why were these names identified? It becomes, will these charges hold up in a court of law? If you are asking that question too, stay with us. Because from this point on, the investigation no longer stops at suspicion. It begins moving into its darkest details. The forest returned Rebecca's body, but the court records are what truly reveal the horror. According to court documents, what investigators describe is not simply a death, it is a process. Prosecutors state that Rebecca did not die immediately. According to the allegations, the victim endured severe and prolonged suffering for a period of time before her death. That factor alone is what separates this case from an ordinary act of violence. And it is why prosecutors have brought the charge of torture, a charge reserved only for cases where violence is not instantaneous, but extended, controlled, and deliberate. The specific details of what Rebecca endured have not been made public, not because they do not exist, but because their severity is considered too disturbing to be described openly. What has truly shaken the community is not only the level of violence, but the context in which it allegedly occurred. According to prosecutors, these acts took place within a family setting, a place that should have been the safest of all. How does a family reach a point like this? And when the trial begins, those details will come into the light, no matter how painful they are to hear. January 2026. The case is brought before the Wexford County Court. At this hearing, two defendants formally face criminal charges. Courtney Bartholomew, Rebecca's biological mother, and Bradley Bartholomew, her stepfather. Inside the courtroom that day are the defendants, attorneys for both sides, the prosecution, along with investigators and several related witnesses present at the court's request. Before the judge, defense counsel files a motion to dismiss the charges. That motion is denied, which means the serious charges remain in full effect. Next, the defendant's request for bond is also denied. According to the court, the severity of the case does not allow for release at this stage. A show cause hearing is scheduled for January 30th, 2026. At that hearing, the prosecution will be required to explain delays in providing discovery to the defense. According to prosecutors, those delays stem from the complexity of the case, including forensic analysis and electronic evidence still under review. Throughout the proceedings, one detail stands out. The defendants make no public statements. Their position is communicated through their attorneys. This is not unusual. At this stage of the process, defendants have the legal right to remain silent, and this is not yet a trial on the merits. Any detailed testimony, if it comes, would only appear in later proceedings after all evidence is formally presented in court. While the legal process continues, one reality remains unchanged. The baby Rebecca was carrying is still missing. A life that never had the chance to be born is still waiting to be found, or at the very least, to be laid to rest. And as the court proceedings move forward, there is one pain that remains unresolved. Nothing truly lasts except the earth and the sky. Amid the charges, the court hearings, and the cold pages of official records, there is one thing that must not be forgotten. Rebecca Park was not born to become a case file. She was a mother who once rocked her children to sleep. Rebecca will not be remembered only for the way she died. She will be remembered for what was taken when she was no longer here. For two children growing up with a question that will never be easy to answer, and for a life that never had the chance to name the world and disappeared in silence. The truth does not arrive loudly. It comes slowly. It comes late. But it comes piece by piece. And when it does, it is not only for justice. It is for those who no longer have a voice. From a woman who vanished into the forest to a homicide case, now standing before the court, Rebecca Park's case is not closed. The most important questions are still waiting to be answered. If you want to continue following the legal proceedings and the truths that have yet to be fully told, stay with the channel. And if you have your own thoughts, leave a comment. What do you believe was the true motive behind this case? Because in stories like this, the truth does not exist only inside case files. It also lives in the questions we are willing to ask. The truth may be buried beneath forest leaves, but it never disappears. Join us as we wait for the next hearing on January 30th to see whether justice will truly be served for Rebecca and for the innocent baby who never had a chance.